All right, today we are really diving into a fascinating and complex chapter of American history. You ready for this?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
The story of the Mormon Church heading west and their whole goal of building their own Zion right there in the thick of the Wild West.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about your typical pioneers and wagon trains here. This was a group with a radical vision, dead set on creating a whole new society completely from scratch.
And the thing is, they almost pulled it off.
Right.
Just picture a map today, but Utah, Nevada, even parts of California and Colorado, all part of one single state.
Wow.
And it's all governed by the Mormon Church.
Wild, right? That was the idea behind Deseret, their proposed state.
It's incredible when you think about it how different the U.S. map could have looked.
Totally.
And this whole Deseret thing, by the way, that's straight from the Book of Mormon. Oh, okay.
Really shows how ambitious they were, how massive this migration was. These weren't just people looking for some land. This was a mission to establish a new society, completely rooted in their beliefs.
So, set the scene for us. It's the 1840s. The Wild West is, well, wild.
As wild as it gets.
Exactly. Then in come these incredibly organized Mormons ready to build, and boy, did they ever build.
It's true. They were unbelievably efficient, especially considering the land.
Yeah.
I mean, they built these super intricate irrigation systems, literally made the desert bloom. Mining, construction, you name it, they did it all.
They do it all with this intense, suck of purpose.
Absolutely. Communal purpose. That's key to understanding their whole deal.
Which is where that beehive symbol comes in, which I've always found so interesting. Oh, yeah. The beehive. Way more than just a cute little logo for them.
Right.
It represented this core belief, this idea of communalism that fueled their success.
So it's interesting, right? You have the American West, this whole image of rugged individualism, and then you have the Mormons sharing resources, putting the community first.
Fascinating contrast.
It's almost like they were like the original socialists in a way.
Interesting comparison. You see, this whole thing about unity and obedience, that was central to their entire social structure.
Okay.
They believed in this concept called exaltation, basically, reaching the highest level of glory in the afterlife. And how you got there, they believed, was by living for the common good, following their leaders. That was the path.
Interesting concept, but I imagine that structure, that kind of system, probably had its downsides too, right? Oh, absolutely. There were definitely downsides. This focus on unity and obedience, it also meant that anyone who disagreed or questioned the leadership, not good.
Yeah, I can see how that would cause some issues.
And that rigidity, combined with their growing power, economically and politically, that's what really put them on a collision course with the U.S. government.
It's almost like, that classic thing where a really tight-knit family moves to a new town?
Oh, I see it.
They've got their own way of doing things, their own rules,
Yeah.
and not everyone's exactly thrilled about it.
Exactly. And in this case, those not-so-thrilled neighbors, that was the U.S. government.
Right.
Who were kind of busy with this whole westward expansion thing themselves, often running into conflict with Native American tribes along the way. So here come the Mormons, strong leadership, efficient communities. They were practically a challenge to this expanding federal power.
Yeah.
You know?
So you have this clash of ideologies, this battle for control of the West, and of course then you throw polygamy into the mix, which really just
Oh, yeah.
ignited everything.
Polygamy, that was a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
We're talking about a time when the very idea of it was just scandalous.
Yeah.
Totally un-American.
And it's interesting because we touch on this a bit in part one, but I'm curious to hear more about how their religious beliefs played into all of this.
Well, you have to remember, for Mormons, it wasn't just about societal norms. They saw this as a matter of faith, a practice commanded by God, and they had their interpretations of Scripture to back it up.
Right, and they had practiced it even before coming to Utah, right? Like back in Nauvoo.
Exactly. It was a part of their lives and their religious practice for years before the big move westward. And this is where things get even more complex, because it wasn't just about religious freedom for them. They saw practical benefits to it as well.
Okay, so what were they saying back then? What was the justification?
Well, some Mormon leaders actually argued that polygamy, or plural marriage as they called it, was actually, get this, healthier.
Healthier, that's a new one. How did that work?
Well, beyond the religious reasons, some claimed it was a more natural order, pointing to examples in nature, even saying it made families more stable. Of course, most Americans weren't buying it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
To them, it just seemed like a way to justify having multiple wives. And honestly, those satirical cartoons from back then, the ones showing Brigham Young with dozens of wives.
Oh, yeah, those did not help.
Not a good look. Those cartoons really painted a picture of Mormons as, like, backwards, power-hungry, a threat to good old American values.
So how did things actually escalate from there? I mean, was it this cultural clash that ultimately led to violence?
It was a lot of things, really.
Hmm.
Religion, political ambitions, the fight for land and resources. But eventually, all that tension boiled over into the Utah War. And you actually saw the Mormon militia using guerrilla tactics against the U.S. Army.
Guerrilla tactics. You don't usually hear about that sort of thing with a religious group. That sounds more like a Western movie than a history lesson.
It shows how serious they were. This wasn't just about words anymore. It was a fight for their survival, for their Zion. And this is where things get really dark
Yeah.
with the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
Yeah, that's one of those events that just chills you to the bone. The fact that a group of Mormons could massacre over 100 immigrants just passing through Utah. It's just
This
horrible.
really is a dark chapter.
Yeah.
A tragic example of how fear, paranoia, religious fervor, they can twist people into doing awful things.
Yeah.
It shows that even communities built on faith and family, they aren't immune to the darkest parts of human nature, you know?
Absolutely. It really makes you think about the complexities of, well, everything we've been talking about.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a clean break, the Utah War. It wasn't just, okay, we're done now.
Right.
It went even further, didn't it?
Yeah, it definitely escalated from there.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. government, they weren't content with just a truce.
Right.
They knew, deep down, that Mormons were still practicing polygamy, keeping it secret, directly defying federal law.
So what'd they do? How'd they respond to that?
Well, they got smart, decided to apply pressure where it hurt most, hit them in the wallets, and get this, their temples.
Whoa.
Their temples.
Imagine that. The government threatening to just seize their temples, the absolute heart of their faith, you know?
That's a huge statement. I mean, to go after something so sacred.
Oh, absolutely. For the Mormons, that was a direct threat. Not just losing property, but their whole way of life, their Zion, could be destroyed.
So what happened? How did they react to that kind of pressure? This is where things take another turn. The Mormon prophet at the time, Wilford Woodruff, he has this vision, powerful religious experience, you know.
Okay, now we're getting into it. A vision, huh? What did it say?
It made it crystal clear. If they kept defying the government on this polygamy thing, the Mormon Church, done, over, catastrophe.
So he saw the writing on the wall. It was either adapt or risk losing everything.
Exactly. And this is huge. This leads to 1890, a pivotal moment. Woodruff issues this manifesto, official declaration.
What'd it say?
Polygamy, over, done, within the Mormon Church, at least officially.
Wow. Can you imagine making that decision? Something they thought was divinely commanded, and suddenly
Huge change.
it really makes you think about faith, about pragmatism.
Yeah.
When does survival outweigh belief?
Totally. It's a case study in adapting, in surviving as an institution.
Yeah.
They were backed into a corner, forced to answer a huge question. How do you stay faithful when you're about to be wiped out?
And that question, that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. It's not just about what happened. It's about the choices people make, trying to make faith work in the real world, you know?
Absolutely.
And it all went down with those incredible Utah mountains as the backdrop, a place we think of now as skiing, beautiful scenery, but back then,
Totally different work.
walking around Salt Lake City today, it's hard to picture those struggles, the sacrifices, just the sheer guts it took to build that community.
Hard to imagine.
It reminds you that history isn't just dates and names, it's about real people in crazy situations. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Mormons, we're left with more questions, aren't we? How'd they go from being this embattled group, always on defense, to this global force they are now?
Just amazing, really.
How'd giving up polygamy change who they were? Well, I guess that's a story for another deep dive, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Going from the fringes of society to the global stage. Talk about resilience. But it's a story that's still being written, you know?
Yeah.
There are still complexities, and that legacy, it's still shaping who they are today.